My husband leaned down, brushed dirt from my cheek, and whispered something so gentle it almost sounded loving. "Sleep well, honey." Then the darkness closed in. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I wasn't alone in that grave. Something under my skin was still awake, and it was quietly telling the world exactly where I was. People think betrayal is loud. It isn't. It's quiet. It happens in familiar kitchens over shared wine, under the same roof where you once felt safest. I had everything people envy: money, security, freedom. I built my fortune before I met him. Tech investments, smart exits, inheritance layered on top of discipline. I didn't flash it. I didn't talk about it. I just lived well. That's why he felt safe approaching me. He wasn't desperate. He was patient. The kind of man who listens more than he speaks, who asks questions that feel like concern instead of calculation. He remembered small things. My allergies, my routines, my fear of confined spaces, which makes what he did later feel almost poetic in the cruelest way. Marriage didn't change him overnight. It refined him. Slowly, I noticed adjustments. He wanted to help manage accounts. He suggested restructuring assets for tax reasons. He insisted on joint signatures, just to simplify things. None of it screamed danger. That's how predators survive. The night it happened felt normal. Too normal. A quiet dinner at home. Soft lighting. He poured the wine himself, smiling in that way that used to calm me. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. That was the last clear thought I had before my body stopped cooperating. The room tilted. My hands went numb. I tried to speak, but my tongue wouldn't move fast enough. He caught me as I fell, held me close, and said the words that still echo in my head. "It's okay. I've got you." I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind. There was pressure everywhere. On my chest, my legs, my face. I tried to move and realized I couldn't stretch my arms fully. That's when panic tried to rush in. But panic is loud and I needed quiet. I was underground, buried, alive. Every instinct screamed to thrash, to claw, to scream, but I didn't. Because buried with me wasn't just my body. It was a decision I'd made months earlier. After watching too many wealthy women disappear, I had done something I never told anyone about. During a routine cosmetic procedure, I'd had a medical-grade GPS tracker discreetly implanted beneath my skin. It wasn't flashy. It didn't connect to my phone. It didn't ask permission. It just transmitted. And it was still working. I focused on my breathing, counting seconds, conserving energy. Dirt pressed down harder every time I moved, reminding me how little margin I had. I didn't know how long I'd last. But I knew one thing. If he thought I was dead, he would move fast. And he did. Somewhere above me, paperwork was being filed. Accounts accessed. Calls made. He was probably rehearsing grief in the mirror, practicing the voice he'd use when people asked questions. What he didn't realize was that my sudden death had triggered something else. The tracker wasn't just location-based. It monitored vitals. A sudden drop, followed by complete signal darkness, activated a silent protocol. No sirens. No notifications to him. Just a quiet alert sent to places he never considered. By the time I felt the first vibration near my ribs, a faint internal hum, I knew someone had noticed. Time passed strangely underground. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt endless. My throat burned. My thoughts wandered. Memories played like distractions, maybe my mind trying to protect itself. Then everything went still. For a moment, I thought I'd lost consciousness. But what actually happened was far worse. The pressure above me shifted. Dirt moved. Air rushed in. The lid cracked open. I didn't scream when light hit my eyes. I stayed very still. He leaned over the opening, his silhouette framed by moonlight. He looked relieved, calm, like a man closing a chapter. He checked for movement, for breath. Then he closed it again. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I waited. I listened. I survived. When I finally crawled out, my body shaking, clothes ruined, skin raw with dirt, the world felt unreal. But my focus was sharp. I didn't call the police. I didn't call for help. I went home. I showered just enough to stop shaking. I wrapped myself in an old coat. I picked up a shovel from the garage, not as a weapon but as proof. Proof that the ground hadn't kept me. By the time I reached the front door, every light inside the house was on. He must have been celebrating. The door opened, and for the first time since the grave, I let him see me. His face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to, because terror doesn't need explanation. His body locked up. His breathing turned shallow, frantic. He stumbled back, clutching his chest, eyes never leaving mine, as if looking away would make me vanish again. Neighbors later said he collapsed. Doctors would call it acute shock, a catastrophic stress response. I call it consequence. I survived, and he learned far too late that assuming someone is powerless is the most dangerous mistake of all. The doctors said it was shock. The neighbors said they had never seen fear like that on a man's face. The police said they needed statements, but none of them knew the full story. Because even when I was standing there alive, breathing, wrapped in dirt and silence, the nightmare wasn't over. That was only the moment everyone else thought it ended. For me, it was just changing shape. They took him away in an ambulance. I watched from the doorway, barefoot, numb, my hands still shaking. Someone put a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else asked if I needed water. Their voices sounded far away, like I was underwater again. I didn't answer, because in my head, one thought kept repeating. He wouldn't have acted alone. People always assume betrayal is personal, that it happens between two people in isolation. But money that large doesn't move without witnesses, without helpers, without silence bought in advance. While everyone focused on him, I focused on what he had already touched. Accounts, documents, transfers that couldn't be undone with apologies. The next morning, while the house was still filled with the echo of sirens and concern, I logged in. That's when I saw it. 3 accounts had already been emptied, not transferred to him but routed elsewhere. Shell companies, offshore layers, names I didn't recognize. My heart dropped. This wasn't desperation. This was a plan. And plans like that don't stop just because one man collapses. I realized something terrifying then. If he recovered, he could lie. If he didn't, someone else would finish what he started. So I did the one thing no one expected from a woman who had just survived trauma. I went quiet. I let them think I was fragile. I let them believe I was overwhelmed. I let people talk around me instead of to me. Grief makes people careless. They reveal things they don't mean to. And slowly, pieces started to surface. A business associate who showed up too quickly. A lawyer who seemed disappointed to see me alive. a distant cousin who suddenly cared about my well-being. Everyone had questions about my health. No one asked how I survived. That told me everything. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. A private number. No message. Just a single image. A photo of my house, taken from across the street. My blood went cold. That's when I understood the final truth. The grave wasn't the real attempt. It was the test. They wanted to see if I would disappear quietly. If I'd be too scared, too grateful to be alive to ask questions. They underestimated me. So I started playing a different role. I pretended to forgive. I pretended to mourn. I pretended not to notice when conversations stopped as I entered rooms. Behind the scenes, I activated every safeguard I had ever prepared but hoped never to use. Emergency trusts, legal triggers, digital dead drops scheduled to release information if I stopped checking in. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't have to. Fear works better when it's subtle. Weeks passed. Then months. Money began returning slowly, quietly, as if reversing itself. Accounts corrected. Documents amended. Apologies arrived without explanations. And one by one, people drifted away from my life. The lawyer retired early. The associate moved overseas. The cousin stopped calling. As for my husband, he survived. But he never recovered. They say his heart never stabilized after that night, that his body remembered something his mind refused to process. He never spoke about the grave, never looked me in the eyes again. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch him staring at the door, listening, waiting, as if part of him believed I might still be out there, watching. People ask me now if I feel lucky. I don't. Luck implies chance. This wasn't chance. It was preparation meeting truth. I learned something buried in the dark that night, something no amount of money could have taught me otherwise. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who hate you. They're the ones who smile while measuring how easy you'd be to erase. And the most powerful moment of revenge isn't screaming, isn't violence, isn't even justice. It's standing alive where someone was certain you would never stand again. If you want, next I can. The house never felt the same after that night. Walls remember things. Floors hold echoes. And silence becomes heavier when it knows the truth. People assumed I would leave, start over somewhere quiet, sell everything and disappear the way I was supposed to. I didn't. I stayed, because leaving would have meant they still controlled the ending. Every morning after, I woke up expecting peace. Instead, I woke up to patterns, small things that didn't add up. A cabinet left slightly open, a light on downstairs when I knew I'd turned everything off. My phone battery draining faster than usual. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Survivors do that. They question their own instincts because everyone else tells them the danger has passed. But danger doesn't disappear. It adapts. One afternoon, while sorting documents with a financial auditor I trusted long before my marriage, he stopped mid-sentence. Just froze. "Did you authorize this?" he asked. He turned the screen toward me. "A new beneficiary request. Filed 2 days ago. Time-stamped. Approved with a digital signature that looked exactly like mine. Except it wasn't." My hands went cold, because I hadn't signed anything since the incident. Someone was still moving, still trying, quietly. I didn't react the way he expected. I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I smiled. And that smile unsettled him more than fear ever could. Because in that moment I realized something powerful. They thought I was recovering. I was actually watching. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with only the reflection of the streetlight on the window. Somewhere between midnight and morning, my phone buzzed again. No number. Just text. You should have stayed gone. That's when the last illusion broke. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about control. About the humiliation of a plan that failed. About people who couldn't accept that someone they'd already erased was still breathing. So I did what they never expected. I invited them closer. I reopened conversations. Agreed to meetings. Let my schedule become predictable again. I wanted them comfortable. Comfort makes people sloppy. At a charity event weeks later, surrounded by polite smiles and champagne flutes, I felt it before I saw it. The shift in the room. Conversations lowering when I walked past. Eyes lingering a second too long. Then I spotted him. Not my husband. Someone else. A man I'd seen only once before, years ago, standing quietly behind my husband during a meeting he had no reason to attend. He was there again now, watching me with an expression that wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Our eyes met, and he smiled. That smile told me everything I needed to know. He thought I was still playing defense. What he didn't know was that weeks ago I'd triggered another protocol, one even deeper than the tracker. A delayed release of records, communications, transaction trails, and voice recordings I had quietly collected over the years without realizing how valuable they'd become. Not to the police, to the people who mattered more. Regulators, boards, institutions that don't knock before they act. All it needed was confirmation, and that smile was confirmation. 2 days later, the calls started. Urgent, panicked, carefully polite. People who had once spoken around me were suddenly speaking to me, offering help, offering clarity, offering cooperation. One man tried to apologize without actually saying sorry. Another suggested we move forward amicably. I listened and said very little, because power shifts fastest when you don't announce it. My husband noticed the change too. He started asking questions again. Nervous ones. Testing ones. Watching me the way people watch storms they hope will pass them by. One evening he finally broke. I don't feel safe, he said quietly, staring at the floor. I looked at him, really looked, and realized the irony. He was living in the same state I had been buried in. Aware, trapped, waiting for something he couldn't control. I know, I replied. That was all. Not long after, investigations began. Not dramatic raids, just letters, requests, meetings that felt routine but weren't. People resigned quietly. Others relocated suddenly. The man from the charity event vanished from public records within a month. My assets stabilized, then grew, and slowly the noise faded. Now, when people hear my story, they focus on the grave, on the shock of survival, on the moment at the door. They think that was the climax. It wasn't. The real ending didn't come with sirens or shouting. It came with silence, with names no longer spoken, with threats that stopped arriving, with doors that no longer opened without permission. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I won by making myself impossible to erase. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels almost normal again, I catch my reflection in the window. Still here, still standing. And I remember something important. The most terrifying thing to someone who tried to bury you is realizing you came back and never left. If you want, next I can. The messages stopped for a while. That's how I knew something was wrong. Threats are noisy. Control is loud. But when people go silent after failing, it usually means they're regrouping. I went back to living carefully on purpose. Same coffee shop. Same walking route. Same gym hours. Predictability isn't weakness. It's bait. One evening, as I was leaving the building, a woman stopped me near the elevator. Late 30s. Polite smile. Too calm. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do you remember me?" I didn't. And that bothered me because I'm good with faces. She didn't wait for my answer. "I used to work with your husband years ago. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're okay." Her eyes flicked to my hands, my posture, my reaction. She wasn't there to comfort me. She was checking something. After she walked away, I stood still long enough to feel my heartbeat settle. Then I did what I'd learned to do best. I checked records. It took less than an hour to find her name buried inside a consulting firm that didn't exist on paper before my death. Same formation date, same state, same notary. The plan hadn't ended. It had evolved. I realized then that surviving the grave wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that I'd been given a second timeline, and they were still operating on the first. So I split my life in two. Publicly, I was cooperative, calm, healing. Privately, I reduced everything to layers, access that required confirmation from systems no single person controlled. Even me. Money became slow. Decisions became delayed. Every move required more than one key. That's when impatience started to surface. Emails with subtle pressure. Phone calls pretending to check in. Offers to help simplify things. Simplification is another word for surrender. One night, I received a calendar invite I hadn't accepted. A meeting. Private office. No agenda. I showed up anyway. The room was small. Clean. Too neutral. Two people were already there. Neither surprised to see me. They spoke carefully, respectfully, as if the past hadn't happened. They said words like misunderstanding and confusion. They suggested that the night I was buried had been a medical emergency handled poorly. That trauma had blurred my memory. That was the moment I understood the final angle. They weren't trying to take my money anymore. They were trying to take my credibility. If I was unstable, everything else would collapse on its own. I let them talk. I nodded. I took notes. And when they finished, I asked one simple question. "Before we continue, do you want to know how many copies exist?" They exchanged a look. I stood up, thanked them for their time, and left without explaining. I didn't need to, because that night 3 things happened. A scheduled disclosure executed, a delayed audit request activated, and a contingency file, one I'd prepared without knowing exactly why, was unlocked. By morning, the tone had changed again. No more meetings. No more pressure. No more pretending. Just distance. Months passed. The house grew quieter. Safer. My sleep returned slowly, unevenly. The tracker under my skin became less of a lifeline and more of a reminder. I hadn't installed it because I expected to be buried. I'd installed it because somewhere deep down I understood this truth. When people benefit from your absence, your presence becomes dangerous. Now, people sometimes ask me why I don't tell the whole story publicly, why I don't write a book, why I don't name names. I smile when they ask, because the real ending isn't something you announce. It's something others feel when they realize the story didn't end the way they planned. I was supposed to disappear quietly. Instead, I became permanent. And somewhere out there, the people who once whispered plans over wine still pause when they hear footsteps behind them. Not because I'm chasing them, but because they know. I already came back once. The strange thing about survival is that people expect gratitude. They expect you to be softer, quieter, more willing to let things go. I learned quickly that forgiveness makes some people bold. After everything settled, after the lawyer stopped calling, after the concerned friends drifted away, there was a stretch of time where nothing happened. No threats, no pressure, no movement. That silence almost fooled me. Almost. Then one morning I received a package. No return address. No note. Just a small velvet box. Inside was my wedding ring. I hadn't seen it since the night I was buried. My stomach dropped, not from fear but from clarity. Someone still had access to places they shouldn't. I didn't react. I didn't tell anyone. I placed the ring back in the box and locked it away with everything else that once defined my old life. Then I started retracing timelines. Who knew where I lived? Who had keys? Who had codes that were never meant to outlast trust? It narrowed faster than I expected. The housekeeper who insisted on keeping her schedule unchanged. The accountant who avoided eye contact after the audit. The neighbor who suddenly waved too enthusiastically. Fear doesn't always hide well. One evening, while reviewing security logs, I noticed something subtle. A pattern of brief signal interruptions, too clean to be glitches. Someone had been testing my perimeter. Not entering, just checking response time. That's when I stopped pretending I was being hunted. I wasn't. I was being observed. People don't watch what they're finished with. They watch what they still want control over. So I did the opposite of what fear would suggest. I expanded. New projects. New investments. Public appearances. I became visible again, but on my terms. Every move documented. Every decision layered with witnesses and redundancies. Visibility is protection when done correctly. It worked for a while. Then came the voicemail. No threats. No demands. Just breathing. Slow. Steady. Familiar. I listened to it 3 times before deleting it. I didn't need confirmation of who it was. What mattered was what it meant. They were trying to remind me of something. Of the grave. Of the night. Of the version of me they believed still existed. They were wrong. I remembered a moment underground. One I hadn't spoken about to anyone. A moment when I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't praying to survive anymore. I was planning. That part of me never went back. Weeks later, the final attempt came disguised as opportunity. A proposal too generous. A partnership framed as reconciliation. It offered protection, growth, closure. It offered me peace on their terms. I declined. Politely. Publicly. Irrevocably. The fallout was quiet but immediate. Connections evaporated. Access vanished. Doors closed themselves. Whatever network had once existed dissolved under its own weight. People who rely on secrecy can't survive exposure, even the threat of it. Now my days are calm in a way they never were before. Not because danger disappeared, but because I understand it. I no longer confuse comfort with safety, or silence with peace. Sometimes late at night I step outside and breathe in the cool air. The world feels solid beneath my feet. Grounded. Honest. I think about how close everything came to ending in darkness, and how it didn't. Not because someone saved me, not because justice arrived dramatically, but because I refused to stay where I was placed. That's the part no one sees. The story people tell ends with the door opening, with shock, with survival. But the real ending, the one still unfolding, is quieter. It's me waking up each morning exactly where I choose to be. Still here, still watching, and no longer afraid of being buried, because I know what it takes to dig my way out. I thought that would be the end, that once the last connection dissolved, once the silence settled into something almost peaceful, the story would finally release me. But endings like that only exist for people who were never truly targeted. Because when someone plans your absence carefully, they don't stop thinking about you just because you survive. They replay it, rewrite it, obsess over where they miscalculated. An obsession always leaks. It leaked the night my power went out. Not the whole neighborhood, just my house. No storm. No warning. The lights cut cleanly, like a switch flipped by someone who knew exactly where to touch. I didn't panic. I sat very still in the dark and listened. There are sounds you only notice when you stop moving. The hum of distant traffic. The soft click of a cooling system resetting. And then something else. Footstep. Inside the house. Slow. Careful. Testing. I stayed seated, my breathing steady, my pulse calm. Whoever it was didn't rush. That told me everything. This wasn't desperation. It was familiarity. They knew the layout. I let them move. Let them think I was asleep or frozen with fear. I waited until I heard the faint creak near the hallway, the exact spot where the floorboard had always been loose. Then I spoke. "You're late." The sound stopped instantly. Silence rushed back in, thick and stunned. "I was wondering when you'd try again," I continued, my voice level, almost bored. "I thought you'd learned." I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't stand up. I let the darkness work for me. A breath. Sharp. Controlled. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said. "Not my husband's. Older. Colder." That was the moment I finally understood the full shape of what I'd survived. My husband hadn't been the architect. He'd been the door. I smiled in the dark. "I know," I said. "That's why this house is no longer mine." A pause. Confusion always comes before fear. "What do you mean?" he asked. I leaned back slightly. "You broke in 2 minutes after the power cut. That means you didn't come alone. That means you expected this to go quietly." Another pause. Longer this time. "But this house," I continued, "triggered an ownership transfer 12 days ago. Temporary. Conditional. Monitored." I let the words settle. And everyone watching that transfer is listening right now. The silence changed. You can hear it when someone realizes they misjudged the room. He backed away slowly. I didn't follow. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. The power came back on by itself 30 seconds later. By the time the lights returned, the house was empty. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of struggle. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something had reached too far and finally touched consequence. The next day I moved. Not in a dramatic way. No suitcases on sidewalks. No goodbye messages. I relocated the way money does when it doesn't want to be found. Cleanly, legally, invisibly. Weeks passed. Then months. And something unexpected happened. I stopped looking over my shoulder. Not because I believed they were gone, but because I no longer needed to see them to know they were finished. Fear only works when it has leverage. They had none left. Sometimes people still ask me if I hate my husband. I don't. Hate requires energy, and I learned underground how precious energy really is. What I feel instead is distance. The kind that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are, and you finally believe them. The grave taught me something most people never learn while they're alive. There are worse things than darkness. There are worse things than fear. Being underestimated is not one of them. I was buried because they thought I was passive. Watched because they thought I was fragile. Challenged because they thought I would stop fighting once I stood up. They were wrong every time. And if there's one last truth I carry with me now, one that never leaves, it's this. Some people try to end stories. Others become the reason those stories never get told again. I didn't think they'd try again. That was my mistake. People who lose control don't walk away, they wait. They convince themselves time will soften you, that distance will make you careless. They study your patterns the way hunters study weather. I learned that on a quiet afternoon when my phone rang from a number I hadn't seen in years. A hospital. They said my husband had asked for me. I almost laughed. Almost. Because after everything, after the grave and the silence and the watching, I knew this wasn't about reconciliation. Men like him don't ask for forgiveness. They ask for proximity. I said no. 2 hours later, a courier arrived with a handwritten note. No apology. No explanation. Just 6 words written carefully like they mattered. I know where you're staying. That was the moment the calm cracked. Not into panic, into precision. I didn't pack. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even lock the door. I walked out with nothing but my phone and the knowledge that this wasn't a threat meant to scare me. It was a reminder. He wanted me to feel hunted again. Instead, I changed the game. I let him think he'd succeeded. I returned his call. My voice was soft, controlled, tired in exactly the way people expect survivors to sound when they finally give in. I'll come, I said, but only if we talk alone. There was a pause, then relief thinly disguised as concern. He agreed too quickly. That told me everything. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and regret. Machines hummed softly, doing work bodies no longer wanted to do themselves. He looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that would have moved me once. Not now. You shouldn't have come, he said. I sat down anyway. I know, I replied, but I wanted to see who was still watching. His eyes flicked to the door. Just for a second. Enough. I leaned forward. You told them I'd be here, didn't you? Silence. It wasn't denial that followed. It was disappointment. They were supposed to be faster, he muttered. That's when I understood the final layer. This wasn't revenge. It was cleanup. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just clearly. They won't come, I said. They can't. He frowned, confusion creasing his face. Every place you thought you still had access to, I continued. Every channel you thought was quiet, they're closed. I let that sink in. And the ones you trusted most? They traded silence for safety weeks ago. His breathing changed. Shallow. Uneven. You're lying, he whispered. I shook my head. I don't have to anymore. I left before he could say anything else. Outside, the sun felt unreal. Too bright for a world that had spent so long in shadows. My phone buzzed once as I stepped onto the sidewalk. A single message. resolved. No details. No celebration. Just confirmation. Days passed without incident. Then weeks. Then months. No calls. No messages. No footsteps in the dark. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like waiting. I moved again, not because I was afraid, but because I could. I chose a place with windows that let in too much light and doors that didn't creak. I planted something in the yard and watched it grow. Life, it turns out, is stubborn. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about the grave. I do. Not with fear. With clarity. Because the truth is, I didn't come back to haunt anyone. I didn't come back for revenge. I didn't even come back to prove anything. I came back because I wasn't finished. And the people who try to decide that for me learned something they'll never forget. You can bury a body, but you can't bury a will that already knows how to survive. And somewhere out there, in rooms that have finally gone quiet, the people who once whispered plans over my absence live with a single, unshakable certainty. They didn't fail because they underestimated my strength. They failed because they forgot. I was listening the whole time. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was watchful. That's the kind of quiet survivors learn to respect. The kind that feels earned but never guaranteed. I didn't mistake it for safety. I treated it like a pause between movements in a long game where no one announces their final move. Months went by. Then a year. I rebuilt my life in ways that didn't look impressive from the outside. No grand announcements. No interviews. No dramatic reinventions. I chose routines that felt boring to anyone watching closely, and boring is powerful. It lulls people into believing there's nothing left to take. But even boredom has fingerprints. One morning, while reviewing a routine compliance report, I noticed a line item that didn't belong. A background check request tied to my name, submitted, withdrawn, then resubmitted under a different firm. Someone was still curious. Curiosity after failure is dangerous. It means someone hasn't accepted the outcome. I followed the thread slowly, carefully, like tugging a wire you're not sure is connected to a bomb. It led to a consultancy that specialized in risk mitigation. A clean name for people who make problems disappear without leaving marks. They weren't targeting me directly. They were testing my perimeter, friends, vendors, old contacts, seeing who would talk, who would hesitate, who would sell silence cheaply. That's when I made my last adjustment. I didn't shut anything down. I opened everything selectively. I let information leak the way fog slips under doors. Not enough to alarm, just enough to shape assumptions. I allowed them to believe I was tired, that I wanted peace more than justice, that I was willing to trade certainty for closure. People who want control always mistake exhaustion for surrender. They came closer. A polite invitation arrived weeks later. A mediation. Neutral ground. No accusations. Just conversation. I accepted. The room was glass and steel and confidence. 3 people sat across from me. Calm. Professional. Almost bored. They spoke about reputations. About moving on. About how conflicts like mine often resolve themselves when emotions cool. I listened. When they finished, I asked a question so simple it landed like silence. Which version of me did you prepare for? They exchanged glances. I continued. The one you thought would be grateful to be alive? Or the one who learned what gratitude costs? No one answered. That was enough. I stood, thanked them, and left. 2 days later, the consultancy folded. No headlines. No scandal. Just quiet dissolving. Clients reassigned, phones disconnected, offices emptied. People who operate in shadows can't survive prolonged attention, even indirect attention. After that, the world finally began to feel honest. Not safe honest. I stopped tracking my steps. Stopped double-checking reflections. Stopped listening for sounds that weren't there. The tracker under my skin became irrelevant, not because danger vanished, but because my life no longer depended on warning systems. I had become my own. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the version of me who believed trust was something you gave freely. I don't judge her. She did what she knew how to do with the information she had. But I'm not her anymore. I'm the woman who understands that survival isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly, like a second heartbeat, steady and unnegotiable. People still tell my story the wrong way. They say it's about revenge, or luck, or fear. They miss the point. It was never about what was taken from me. It was about what couldn't be taken, no matter how deep they buried it. And if this story has an ending at all, it isn't a moment or a line or a final confrontation. It's this. I wake up each day unafraid of the dark, because I already know what waits there, and it's not stronger than me. So when the world finally went quiet, I didn't mistake it for peace. I recognized it for what it truly was. Acceptance. The thing about acceptance is that it doesn't arrive all at once. Comes in layers. First, it looks like people giving up. Then it feels like distance. And finally, it settles into something deeper, resignation. The kind that says, this person is no longer movable. I thought I'd reached that point. I was wrong. It happened on an ordinary morning. No tension. No warning signs. Just sunlight through the windows and the sound of coffee brewing. My phone sat untouched on the counter, face down, quiet. Then it vibrated. One notification. No sender. No preview. Just a symbol I hadn't seen in a long time. The internal emergency marker from my tracker. My body froze, not in fear but in disbelief. That signal was designed for one thing only: movement without consent. I hadn't gone anywhere. I hadn't authorized anything. Yet something connected to me. Something buried beneath my skin, something I'd stopped thinking about, had been pinged. Someone was checking if I still existed. Not where I was. Whether I was still alive. That's when I understood the truth that had been avoiding me all this time. This was never about erasing me. It was about confirming I could be erased. Some systems don't shut down until they receive proof. I didn't respond. I didn't intervene. I let the signal pass unanswered. Because whoever triggered it expected one of two outcomes: panic or silence. And silence tells its own story. Over the next few days, subtle changes followed. A background inquiry canceled mid-process. A scheduled audit request quietly withdrawn. A name removed from a digital access list I hadn't checked in months. Someone somewhere had gotten their answer. I was still here. And that meant the risk had returned. That night, I dreamed of the grave again. But not the way I used to. This time I wasn't trapped. I was standing above it, looking down at disturbed earth that hadn't fully settled. Someone else had been digging. In the morning, I made a decision I'd avoided for a long time. I stopped reacting. Instead, I closed the loop. I contacted one person. Only one. Someone who didn't know me loyalty, fear, or gratitude. Only accuracy. I gave them access to something I'd kept sealed. A complete chronological record of everything. Not accusations. Not conclusions. Just facts. Then I walked away from it. Weeks passed. The world stayed normal. too normal. Until it didn't. The first sign was an article buried deep in a financial bulletin. Nothing dramatic. A firm dissolving due to internal inconsistencies. No names mentioned. No explanation offered. Then another. And another. People don't disappear publicly anymore. They dissolve quietly like sugar in water. I felt no satisfaction reading it. Only relief. Because closure doesn't feel like victory. Feels like weight leaving your body. I haven't heard from my husband since that hospital day. No messages. No second attempts. No reminders. He finally understood what everyone else eventually learns. There are some people you don't try to finish. You let them go. Now, when I tell this story to myself, not to others, just to me, I stop before the grave. I stop before the door. I stop before the fear. Because that isn't where it ends. It ends somewhere quieter. With me standing in a life that no longer needs to look over its shoulder. With systems that once tracked my survival now irrelevant. With the understanding that the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't escaping the dark. It was refusing to let the dark define the rest of my life. And if anyone is still watching, still wondering whether I'm finished, they already know the answer. I'm not. I never was. I scheduled the appointment quietly. No urgency. No fear. Just certainty. The doctor asked why I wanted it removed. People always ask for reasons when something has protected you for so long. I told him the truth. I don't need it anymore. The procedure was simple. Fast. Almost disappointing after everything it had meant. When it was over, he placed the tiny device on a tray beside me. So small. So harmless looking. Hard to believe it had once been the only thing standing between me and disappearance. I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then I walked away. That night I slept without backup plans. Without alerts. Without systems watching my pulse. I slept the way people sleep when they trust the ground beneath them again. Deep. Uninterrupted. Real. In the morning, sunlight filled the room. I stood barefoot on the floor and felt its weight. Solid. Honest. Present. No messages arrived. No signals triggered. No one checked if I still existed. For the first time, I wasn't being tracked by fear or by anything else. People think survival stories end with noise, with confrontation, with justice announced loudly so everyone can hear it. Mine didn't. Mine ended with something much quieter. It ended the day I stopped preparing for my life to be taken. Because the truth is, I wasn't saved by technology. I wasn't saved by luck. I wasn't even saved by revenge. I was saved the moment I decided that what happened to me would not decide who I became afterward. They buried me believing I would disappear. They were wrong. Not because I came back covered in dirt. Not because someone collapsed in terror. Not because plans unraveled. But because I stayed. I stayed alive. I stayed aware. I stayed present. And then, when the danger finally realized it had no hold left, I let it go. That's the real ending. Not survival. Freedom.